As board game teachers, we are the bridge between gamers and fun. The longer we make that bridge, the less inclined they are to have fun. So it is our job to make that bridge as short as possible. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Wolfpack. I just got extremely inspired right now to talk about this, and I don't really even know why it popped up, but I think it's a very important topic and something that I think it's super interesting, mostly because I think there are a lot of habits that I notice in board game instructors. I'm not trying to say like I'm the best instructor or a great instructor, but I think as someone who teaches games every single week, there are habits that I notice that helps me learn, which is something that I try to improve by myself. So that's something that I want to share today, and hopefully it helps you along the way. But either way, I just think it's super interesting and I just gotta talk about it right now. If you're teaching a board game, I think you have such a big job because it's almost like you're the first influence of whether or not someone's going to enjoy the game. You teach it wrong, you give a bad vibe about it, you put the wrong mood or spin to it, people are less likely to enjoy the game. So if you're animated, if you are even more than usual, if you're animated, if you give a good story, if you make it as short as possible, if you get players to the fun, I think they're more likely to enjoy the game. Like imagine if I'm teaching Oathsworn in a group of 4 co-op experience and I'm just like reading through the rulebook one by one. For us, we probably find it interesting, which I do all the time. But like if I were to just read off the rulebook and make it very dense, very heavy, very information filled, that's not going to be anywhere near as fun versus if I were to like cut it up, give succinct information, show people exactly what they can do and all the creative decisions that they can make with their character. That's going to be way more interesting than just reading it like a textbook. Second point, and I don't want to belabor on Oathsworn too much, but it just happens to be here because it's all set up already. But one other thing I've noticed too is that great board game instructors know how to read people. I have noticed this characteristic when I was teaching games at a convention. So when I was teaching games like all day, every day, like many others at conventions, I noticed that you rarely ever give the same spiel. When I used to present posters for neuroscience, it's the same thing. You do know the story, you do know how to teach the game, but every single person that you talk to, you'll never give the same story twice. And one big part of that is knowing how to read people. Because sometimes people are there and they want to learn the game in 15 seconds. And then in the same group, you have other people that need to know every single rule before they make their first turn. And also in that same group, you have people that have a lot of questions and that they may not absorb that information in the same way as everyone else. You got fast learners, you got learners that will take a little bit of time to absorb the information. You got, like me, I take forever to absorb information. You have people that want to know every single rule before they take their turn. And you have people that want to take their turn within the first 10 seconds and just play as you go. So when you have a group setting like that, you have to be able to accommodate and read people. And then you also are talking over hundreds of thousands of people in the same room that has a ton of echo. So it's actually a pretty stressful situation if you think about it. So like props to all the teachers at conventions because they really go through it and their voice is just gone by the end of the day for a reason. Here's the point I'm trying to make here. It helps a lot to kind of look around the table as you're teaching and as you're giving your speech, look around to everyone and see what they're like, read their body language. Are they kind of slumped over in their chair? Are they kind of just like looking around? And are they listening to you? They're looking at you? Because if they're not, that kind of signals that their attention is going elsewhere. So cut to the chase as much as you can and get to the point where you are having them interact. Because again, we are the bridge to fun. So we want to get them having fun as much as possible. If there are other people there that want to learn the rules, fine, but then just make sure that you're trying to keep everything succinct. And I know that's a lot easier said than done, but when you read people, look at their body language, interact with them, because ultimately you don't want to talk at people, you want to talk with people. So asking them questions, like even like little quiz questions, makes them interact and it kind of wakes them up a little bit. And that's something I do quite often too, not like intentionally. I think that's just my teaching background from like being an instructor before for science and everything. It's like I love asking questions as I'm teaching. So for instance, if I'm teaching Oathsworn here, everyone has their own individual character board. So then I'll maybe ask something that is involved with it and will make them take a turn. So maybe I'll ask them like, oh, how much might do you have, which is one of their stats? Or like, oh, how do you use your card? Well, and then their answer would be, oh, I'm spending anima here and shifting them from one side to the other to spend that as a resource. So asking those questions really gets them involved, and it breaks up the point where you're not talking at people, you're talking with people. Now, the next point I wanted to make is pretty related to like cutting down your teach time. But ultimately, it's like, I'm going to use this quote directly from Elementary, which was a show all about Sherlock, but I think it's such a good quote that I use all the time today. And that is, imagine our brains as a glass of water. Imagine this as our brain, right? This is the capacity that we have for learning a game specifically. And we want to fill it up with water as much as we can. We don't want to fill it up with oil because oil is unnecessary information. Yo, that metaphor is good. You gotta admit, that's why I use it till this day. And what I mean by that, specifically into the context of games, is that when you're teaching, use as little words as possible. Now, this is a skill that I'm constantly refining, and one that I know, especially for like everyone sitting in a college class, a lot of this can be applicable to that point, especially when we're trying to lecture and teach something. You don't want to do this. So when you are playing Harvest and, on your turn, you can take your meeple, actually they call it like Animeeple. So you can take your Animeeple, and then each Animeeple has their own unique ability, but we can play with the side that has the ability or the side that doesn't have it if it's for a more basic faction. But basically, you're going to take that Animeeple and then you're going to place it anywhere you like, but you can place it over here to the market. And then when you're in the market, there's steps 1, 2, and 3. There are 3 spots that you can place it in. And then when you place it on the one spot, you'll get money, but you can only take one. You see what I mean? Like, it just really makes it an extremely long teach. You are filling this cup with more oil than water. Let's summarize that point. And I'm using myself as an example, okay? 1, avoid spilling out every single thing that is racing in your mind. So just distill it down to what you can. On your turn, you're gonna take your Animeeple and you can place it in the market. At the market, you can take actions depending on which space you're in. If you're on the 3 action, you can take 3 actions. If you're on the 2 action spot, you can take 2 actions. And then at the market, you can buy any of these ingredients. So see how I cut down all that information. That way you are filling this cup up that, again, everyone has a limited amount of patience and brain capacity, including myself, to fill in that day. So you want to fill in as much water as possible. See all that? That was water. That's all straight information. Now they know exactly what they're doing on their turn and what happens at the market. That's the point that I am striving to get to, and that I think is very helpful for being an effective board game teacher. So with that said, let's just summarize all the points that I talked about today. 1, be able to read people if you can, read their body language and see what they need to get to the end goal, which is to the fun. If you're kind of losing their attention, stop real quick, and then we'll get to point number 2, and that is start interacting with them, right? Because again, we want to talk with people, not at people, and ask them a question. Ask them something that they're going to do on their turn. You're not interrogating them. You're not quizzing them as if they're going to fail a test. You're just asking them to have interactions between their character and what you're playing, or just overall, you want to be able to play with them, not teach them and then have them play by themselves, which then leads to the point, keep your teach as short as possible. And that lends to the final point that I was talking about, where again, we're gonna think about that elementary Sherlock analogy here and fill up their brains, which is this cup, with as much water as possible, and trying to minimize how much oil, how much unnecessary information that we are giving players. So keep the teach as succinct and as short as possible, and I think that will make us better board game teachers. So sorry for the random rant today, but I just got inspired, had to turn on the camera and really just talk about this point with you all. And I hope you all found it interesting and helpful in some way. I'm constantly trying to become a better teacher too, and I know that one of my biggest weaknesses is not giving enough connected information right away. I kind of like forget little bits and details, and I try to remember them as we go. And so sometimes I kind of circle back, like, oh wait, I forgot. There was this point, like if we were using Harvest as an example again, like, oh, by the way, I forgot there's this space over here called the trading post where you can put your work over there, and it's only one person available in that spot where you can trade. But more importantly, I would love to know your thoughts. Like, what makes a good board game teacher for you? For your board game instructor in your gaming group, what makes them like really effective, and what makes you learn a game easier? I would love to know, because all these thoughts are helpful to me, and I'm sure as a community, as the Wolfpack, it will help all of us together. So chime in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you made it here to the very, very end, go ahead and comment water, because that's what we want to fill our gamers' heads with, water and not oil. All right, all. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.